we have a Torah perspective. Torah perspective is that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us the land. It's our land. God gave it to us. We are relating to people who don't necessarily believe that. So how do we speak to people who don't believe that? We can say to them, listen, God gave it to us, and we don't care what you have to say. We're gonna stand by our standards. That's one way of approaching it. The question is that these people, how do they know we're telling the truth? See, the problem is, if you don't believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the land, how would you look at this otherwise? See, in a certain way, I have a certain understanding of a lot of understanding of our approach to Torah, and that is that we make decisions al pi Torah, but we also have to understand what the decisions we made not al pi Torah, and relate the two of them. Let me give an example. If you're hungry, right? Let's say you're really, really hungry, and you see a non-kosher piece of meat, right? Or you see, let's say, someone who's really, really hungry, and the person, sees something that is edible, and says, I want to eat it. Okay? So the truth is that could be a very smart thing to do, right? The point is, in fact, if you really look at it, okay, if I see someone who is sick, and I give him something, and he says, "Oh, it's not kosher, I don't eat it," and I look at him and say, "Wait a second, you're sick, you need energy, you should eat it." So the point is that if you're not a person who believes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told you not to eat something kosher, the correct response is to eat that kosher, to eat that non-kosher thing. That would be the moral thing to do. The point is that if you do believe that God told you not to eat it, then the moral thing to do, the correct thing to do, is not to eat it. See, a lot of times when people discuss Torah, I mean, that's a simple one in terms of chukim, in terms of things that we don't know the reasons for and so forth. But a lot of times people don't understand that if you're a mamin in Torah, you're going to believe A. If you don't believe in Torah, then A would be the incorrect answer. The correct answer would be something else. This happens a lot in our looking at Torah. The fact is that many, many times I confront situations where, to me, the correct answer is one way because I believe in Torah Mishamayim, because I believe God set these rules. But if I didn't believe in Torah Mishamayim, Chas v'shalom, I would have to say another conclusion is correct. Okay? Like, for example, let's take intermarriage. Okay? If I say to a couple, you shouldn't get married because you're Jewish and you're not Jewish, it's true, al pi Torah. If I go up to someone and say, you shouldn't get married because you're Jewish and you're not Jewish, and I don't believe in Torah Mishamayim, I don't believe that God distinguishes Jewish people, that statement could just be similar to any other racist statement, telling whites not to marry blacks, telling one group not to marry another group. Fact is that Torah does not necessarily pattern themselves on this, or parallel its decisions on what a person who has a moral perception would decide if he didn't believe in Torah. See, this happens all the time. And a lot of people don't recognize it. But the fact is if you believe in Torah Misinai and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you a certain mitzvah and viewpoint, then you'll come to one conclusion. Has to be that way, because that's what God said. But if you didn't have God telling you this, then if you're sensitive to certain moral perceptions and moral ideas, you may actually come to a different conclusion. These are tensions that come up all the time. And the fact is these are tensions that have a place in the halachic system. For example, in certain situations, you are supposed to respond to a halachic conclusion with a certain amount of hesitancy. Like in the Agunas situation. Okay, the woman who cannot remarry because of some technical aspect of halacha. Well, if you believe in Torah Misinai, then that technical aspect of halacha is very real. And you have this idea that no, this has got to be the law. But the fact is that you recognize, the fact is we also have a motivation to find heterim, which is also built into the halachic system. But the point is our moral perceptions that parallel Torah Misinai, the moral perceptions we may have otherwise, may motivate us to investigate. So the truth is that in the Aguna situation, if you did not believe that God set these rules that would make it, incorrect for this woman to remarry, you would sit there and say, let her remarry. You can't have rules like that. And this is one of the issues that comes up all the time. People generally who take certain attitudes, it's because they don't believe in Torah Mishamayim. They take these attitudes. Now, so what I'm trying to say is if you have an ethical person who doesn't believe in Torah Mishamayim, they're going to come to conclusions that are going to be different than the conclusions reached if you believe in Torah Mishamayim. Now, of course, people who aren't ethical whatsoever, they're for sure going to have conclusions that are different than Torah. No doubt about it. But you can have a person that you can see as an ehrlicha person and a good person and wants to do the right thing. But if they don't believe in Torah Mishamayim, then they will come to conclusions which are different than the conclusions you're going to reach because of your belief in Torah Mishamayim. That's a very important concept to recognize. That sometimes the people we're going to be disagreeing with, sometimes they're vildachayas, sometimes they're wrong people, sometimes they're immoral people, and so forth and so forth. And I don't want to deal with the question as how does someone have a moral or an ethical system if there's no revelation. I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to issue whether there really is a concept of natural morality and the fact that that this is also something that is tied to the reality of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The truth is I happen to accept the fact, and there are many people who believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed within mankind is a concept of natural morality, which has the person understand some aspect of morals outside of Torah Misinai, outside of the revelation. But the point is that if you do believe in revelation, you are going to have conclusions which are different than the conclusions of people who don't believe, who people who are ethical but don't believe in revelation. So this creates a very interesting situation. You can have situations with people who basically may actually share your conclusions, but the reasons they share your conclusions are actually problematic to you, because you have this conclusion because you believe in Torah Mishamayim. This person has a conclusion because they have very improper ethical perspectives. So you have this, like for example, I said into marriage. I really believe that there's Torah Mishamayim, and therefore a Jew has to marry a Jew, and so forth and so forth. But there are people who really are almost like racists in their attitudes towards non-Jews. and sort of course a Jew shouldn't marry a non-Jew, and almost using the same attitude as saying whites shouldn't marry blacks and so forth. So the fact is that person comes to the same conclusion as I do. Jews should marry only Jews, but their motivation is different than my motivation, because my motivation is from the fact that Kodesh Baruch Hu said it. Okay, and their motivation is out of a principle which I actually have problems with, a racist principle, and so forth. So to me, that's a major issue vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael and how we're going to deal with it. It's a tremendous issue to me in terms of Eretz Yisrael. I believe that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us this land, no doubt about that, and so forth, and therefore it's our land. The fact is that many people don't accept that. Okay. Those people who are perhaps more, how do they look at this argument, and what's their feeling with that? And how am I supposed to relate to people who I believe are maybe sincerely interested in doing something moral, but are not applying the revelation idea? Now, Alex presents a very interesting question here. When I said that thing about intermarriages, however, Alex writes, well, that assumes there are no racist motivations in Torah, and there is something ethically wrong with the idea that race is very important. The truth is that the very point of revelation is to tell you that the nationality of being Jewish is important. See, the reason that we have problems with racism is because racism states that there's a distinction of people that we have no basis for. Right? In other words, blacks and whites, what's the difference? Why should a black not marry a white? Okay? Why? Both human beings. What's the reason why they shouldn't get married? So the fact is it comes down to, well, because they're different. Okay? The point is that does that difference allow this type of distinction? In Torah, when we say a Jew should not marry a non-Jew, what we're then saying is because there's a reason, and that reason is significant, and we have to build upon that reason. Okay, and then we have to take it from there and show the importance of that reason, and therefore we have to also bring that reason into validity, into reality. Okay, so the point is, and I think this is a significant aspect of we talk of being the Am Nivchar, being the chosen people, is that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us and distinguished us, then we have a responsibility to be distinguished. When it says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to create us a Mamlechus Kohanim and a Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, okay, and that's our distinction, then that has to be our goal. Okay, if we're going to be distinguished, we have to meet the standard of being distinguished. And if we don't meet the standard of being distinguished, then we are challenged because of it. Okay? So the point is that what I'm working at is a perception of finding reasons and meanings and so forth. Okay? Now, Alex responds to me with this argument. He says, if one assumes that one's genetic makeup is fundamental to one's perspective on life, or more precisely, it is very reasonable to expect a person of a certain genetic or racial make to behave a certain way, and which is different from ours, then there's a very good reason to look negatively on interracial marriage. The fact is that you can give that assumption, but the point is that sometimes opposites attract. So it's the same argument people have that says, listen, people with a similar background should get married because over two diversified backgrounds, there's a lot of friction in the marriage. Okay, that's advice. See, that's advice, and basically this advice can be taken, not taken, or whatever, but it's advice. And maybe someone wants to have a little bit more of a disruptive advantage because they want to learn from different perspectives. And then you'd have to look to say, hey, is that really what occurs in an interracial marriage? Okay, I mean the point is that you can take this idea and then validate it or whatever. But what occurs is is that there's a difference between making a statement right off the bat and just saying it's wrong. Okay, but the point is al pi Torah, you have statements of this nature. And that now leads to this issue with Eretz Yisrael. See, one of the things that hits me about Eretz Yisrael, okay, thanks. Okay, is this better? Am I better now? Okay, one of the things that hits me about Eretz Yisrael is that we are our right to Eretz Yisrael is because the Kodesh Baruch Hu gave it to us. The world around us, most of the world around us, doesn't believe that God gave us this land. Therefore, they think that we don't have a strong right to the land. So we have two approaches to this. Okay. What I'm doing is saying, okay, I can sit there and say, listen, al pi Torah, I'm right. I'm not challenging that. But here's a person who, because he doesn't believe in Torah, she doesn't believe in Torah Sinai, doesn't accept this right to the land, because of their ethical perception or ethical understanding, which I would happen to agree with. In other words, the way they're going to make this decision, I would think shows that they're very worthwhile people. They're actually very fine people. The fact that they're going to make this type of decision, they would have to come to a decision that would be different than the reliable decision because they don't accept the fact that God gave us this land. And therefore, what happens is I am fighting people who I think are showing an ethical sensitivity that I happen to like. On the other hand, I then find myself joining with people who actually, if they support me, may be motivated because they don't believe in Torah Sinai by an ethical system or perspective which I find abhorrent. And that's a real problem. That's a real problem. Okay? And that, I think, is one of the major problems that exists in our world today in dealing with Eretz Yisrael. Now, I'm not saying this for everyone who's against. The fact is that if I believe that if you didn't accept Torah Sinai, the proper ethical conclusion would not to be that the Jews should have Eretz Yisrael, then I find myself disagreeing with people who have basically a moral perspective, which I looked up to, and perhaps finding myself agreeing with people who have a perspective which I find problematic. Therefore, there's two options before me. One option before me is to try and figure out how to live with that situation. Okay? The other option before me is to try and see if there's an argument that gives Eretz Yisrael to the Jews as a moral right, and shows that the moral perspective, the proper moral perspective, would include the right of Jews to Eretz Yisrael, even without the argument of Torah Sinai. Now, this is, to me, is a major issue to me in terms of looking at Eretz Yisrael, to be honest with you. I am very concerned about people who take a very strong attitude towards Yisrael who don't believe in Torah Sinai. Because I get concerned that maybe their motivations are unethical. Because without Torah Sinai, you potentially can't arrive at an ethical decision to say the Jews should be in Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, okay, I'm not saying this, that's my question, Alex. I was just unethical how. My question is that if you don't believe in Torah Misinai, okay, put together the ethical argument that says that the Jews should be in Eretz Yisrael and should be the political dominion in Eretz Yisrael, and it's important to come to that conclusion. And furthermore, to show the people who don't abide by that viewpoint are really the unethical ones. Okay? So that's the challenge that I think we have to exist with, because we live in a world. I mean, let me step back. We can do two things. We can sit there and say we believe in Torah Misinai. These guys don't. We really don't care. Okay, and ignore it. Okay, and say, listen, yeah, it's true that if you don't believe in Torah Misinai, they would not support it. They would come to Bethel, but I don't care. I believe in Torah Misinai, so it doesn't matter. But on the other hand, if you really believe in a dialogue, and you believe it's important to have a dialogue and to work with these people and so forth, then somehow you have to have an argument not based upon Torah Misinai. Okay? And that's a little bit more difficult to do. It's a little more difficult to do, because in certain ways, Torah Misinai is the basic trump card. That basically, in the end, of course, Baruch Hu gave us the land. So the question is when all these people challenge us, ethically, who don't believe in Torah Misinai, how do I show them that this is an ethical position without relying upon Torah Misinai? Okay. So Cheryl is writing something now. Okay, Cheryl, I was going to give you the mic in a minute, but if this is your question, I'm going to read it. Often I find that religious people turn to Torah to support their point of view in discussion of ethic religious issues with non-religious people. And it seems they do not consider that non-religious people do not consider Torah to be authoritative. Those of us who do take Torah seriously, for us, Torah is authoritative. But for others, it is not. So how can we expect our point of view to take precedence over theirs? I mean, Torah only has authority if you believe that it does. Now, that's exactly my point. How do I relate to a world that's not taking my point of view? And not only that, because they don't take my point of view, their ethical conclusion will be different than mine. Right? Okay. How do we do that vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael? So to me, the first step is to recognize that it actually is significant. It's important for us to take these steps, because the fact is that within ourselves there are many sources in the Torah that says we're supposed to be looked upon positively by the non-Jewish world. Now, the first step is to be looked upon positively by the non-Jewish world. Then they will come to respect Torah. Rak am chacham v'nevon, the line we always find, that I quote constantly in NISHMA, Rak am chacham v'nevon, just a wise and understanding people. The point is, they'll see that, and then they'll say, whoa, how did they get to be so wise and understanding? It must be from their Torah. But the first thing they have to do is come up with a perception this is a wise and understanding people. And then we have to show where we get from, but that leads to Torah. But the truth is that their yardstick in seeing that we're a wise and understanding people is not going to be the yardstick of Torah. It's going to be the yardstick not of Torah. It's going to be the yardstick of their own perceptions. The idea of Chilul Hashem in certain viewpoints. They're looking at us and saying, hey, we think we thought you're ethical, and here you're acting in a way that's not ethical. So we can respond to, no, wait a second, we're acting in a way that's ethical with Torah because we believe in Torah Sinai, and you guys won't get it. But the fact is, we are supposed to be concerned about their yardstick. We are supposed to. There's a lot of halachas that says that if they look at us in a certain way, we are supposed to be concerned about that. We want to come across as ethical pursuant to their yardstick as well. So to me, I think it's extremely significant that we have arguments that work within that realm. Now, this doesn't mean that we in any way negate Torah Misinai. Of course we believe in Torah Misinai. Second of all, in terms of bottom line, right, we're going to go to Torah Misinai, and if it means that they're going to perceive us as unethical, so be it. But the point is, there's still an argument to try and say, how can I uphold my ethical standard, my perception of being ethical by them? Okay. Now, the truth is not every argument of theirs is ethical. I mean, the fact is many people may support many people support what do you call it? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Many people may support a ethical perspective which we totally disagree with. But the point is that we somehow, in our disagreement, have to. But we are supposed to take into account their idea of an ethical perspective. Now, Alex asks the question here. I mean, Cheryl makes a point here. But if their ethical yardstick says that certain things are ethical that we do not, example, homosexuality, etc., that's exactly the problem. It's exactly part of the issue. Okay, Alex then says, does it also imply that their ethical point of view has some absolute divine, whatever you want to call it, truth to it? The fact is, I do believe it does, because I believe that if you look in terms of the Chumash, there's an Eitz Das Tovara that Adam Chava ate from, that gave them the ability to distinguish between Tov and Ra. Right? They have an internal ability to distinguish between the Tov and Ra. Okay, when they covered themselves in terms of tznius, in terms of covering themselves, they didn't cover themselves because God told them to cover themselves. They felt it was wrong not to be covered, not to dress in a matter of being of tznius. And that's a whole different thing in terms of what tznius is and so forth. But the fact is I do believe that the Kodesh Baruch Hu did give us some ethical perception, and then he gave us revelation on top of it. Now the truth is, that's a whole approach of Nisengon, and it's Hakdama to Shas, as you find in the beginning of a Masechta Brachot, in a regular edition of the Gemara, Masechta Brachot. Nisengon defends this idea from the idea that man has a certain sense of reason and what he calls sichlius, in terms of understanding of certain concept, rational thought or whatever, that leads to a certain type of ethical conclusion. Then on top of that, he was given also revelation. But there is something that says that there's some inner perspective. But what I'm pointing out is that in our realm, when we live in the world the way we do right now, we have an interesting dilemma. Because those people who may actually have an ethical sensitivity may be people who disagree with our conclusion because they don't accept Torah Misinai. They don't have an acceptance of revelation. So there's one of two options. I mean, it all comes down to it. How do you live with this? How do you maintain your argument for revelation, and even though it puts you into being an argument with people who may be the more ethical people and may actually put you in cahoots with the people who are less ethical? Or the other option is, how do you bridge this gap? So in a certain way, okay, it's necessary sometimes to come up with some arguments that work outside of revelation. Okay. Now, in doing that, I think that's significant vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael. Okay, but the first step is to understand the ethical argument. And I find that this is something that I personally find to be problematic vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael. In a sense that I think there's a significance in understanding the challenge that we face, if I may use that term. If you don't believe in Torah Misinai, if you don't believe that God gave us the land, then people are going to argue, well, you shouldn't be taking it from the Arabs. Now, our response is going to be, well, God gave it to us, so of course we're right to take it back because God gave it to us. But these people don't buy that, so how can I give them an argument that it's right for us to be taking this land without relying upon Torah Sinai, so that I can say that I can show you that even according to your perspective, right, you should recognize a right to the land. Now this is significant on another plane, in the sense that many people, you take Hamas, their argument is not rational, their argument is another religious perspective. So the fact that Hamas will always look upon us negatively, I'm not worried about. Okay, there's no way to change it because they have a completely different perception of life. They accept something in Revelation which we don't accept ever happened. So we're not going to be able to convince them. And we have to know that. But the fact is we have to be able to have arguments to an extent. I'm not saying this has to be the total end argument. I'm not saying we can always do this. Sometimes we just have to say, listen, that's Exeris Akasa, that's what God said. Okay, we don't know why, sometimes, but that's what God said. But we have to come up with some arguments here at Yisrael that says, listen, this makes sense, even if you're just using your seichel, your rational thought. And I'm saying it's significant to do it so we can show that we stand this way and so forth. Then we have to be honest about this. So, what I find is there's not enough work done in this regard. A lot of things are thrown out very simply and so forth and so forth, but I find that there's not enough work that is done on this. And what it comes down to is to understand what I think is the real issue here. See, I don't think the battle in Eretz Yisrael is a battle between Jews and Arabs. I think the battle in Eretz Yisrael is a battle between the Eretz Yisrael being the homeland of the Jewish nation, or Eretz Yisrael being like any other nation and the homeland for the inhabitants of the land. That's the real issue. Within Western society, if you inhabit the land, you should have a right to have political dominion on that land. And what's happening is these people are saying, hey, the Arabs are here, they should be able to have dominion on the land. And that's why even some people say, hey, just make one big democratic nation. So we have to come up with an argument against that. What's our argument against that? Well, God gave us the land. Not like that. But there's another argument against that without relying upon God gave us the land. And now this is something that's absolutely remarkable that most Jews don't recognize. And that is that we are a nation like any other nation. Okay? Let me try and explain why we're a nation like any other nation. You see, anyone who gets involved in this issue, when they really define people, they define people totally by who inhabits the land. Okay? The Kurds, I saw someone here mention something about the Kurds, their right, okay, their right is as Kurds because they lived in Kurdistan. Right? Okay? Okay, now Cheryl is saying maybe there's no rational argument. Maybe it must be that the only way to defend Eretz Yisrael is by recognizing you believe in Torah Sinai. And you stand your ground and say, listen, okay, hey, this is it. We have to be halachic to defend the land, and therefore it becomes a situation where what was this before? It becomes a situation where we're not going to be able to explain it to others. This is just simply our land. But when you start to talking, it might be like that. But there might be another perspective that gives us a better understanding of the issue if we're able to argue from a perception that's not relying upon Torah Sinai. And this is where you get into the issue of the uniqueness of the Jewish nation. You see, most nations are products of inhabiting the land. Most nations are products of land. The problem over here is yes, we were on the land 2,000 years ago. Okay? The fact is what's so interesting over here is that we are a nation that's coming back to our land after 2,000 years and have maintained our entity as a nation. So we're coming back. We're not like the British. You see, that's the whole problem. If you look at the world, their whole language is to compare the Israelis and the Palestinians to the British and the Indians. From the country of India. See, let me give you an example. I saw something on CNN yesterday about some woman talking about nonviolence protests and so forth and so forth. And what's interesting is her language. She used language like the occupation and the occupation forces and the occupiers and so forth and so forth. It's the exact same language that would be used when Gandhi fought to kick the British out of India. But there it was an occupation. The English, which had no basis to the land whatsoever, came in as a conquering nation, and now the inhabitants of the land wish to take back political dominion over their land. So they want to get rid of the invaders. And this is the way people try to express it. If you look closely at the language, they call Israel the occupiers. The Israelis are the occupiers. The truth is, if you look at some arguments from some of the Arab arguments, they argue about how the Jews came from Europe, therefore putting in the same context as the other European colonialists. In other words, it's someone from outside of this land colonializing, setting up a colony in this land, taking dominion like every other European country. India, Africa, all over Africa, any other European country. And then what happened in the 60s? Okay? Yes, Alex says much of the rhetoric is directed to the West, and very true. Okay? Yeah, and you're right about your argument also, Stuart, that might to a large extent might still makes right. But the fact is, what I'm trying to say though is that from an ethical perspective, when you hear people talking, is the language is significant. They're using the same language that was used by the people who wanted in Africa who wanted to get rid of the British, or the way the people in India wanted to get rid of the British. They use the exact same language. Okay? Now, how do we avoid that? The fact of the matter is we're in a unique situation, and this is something that is absolutely unique. The situation with the Jewish nation is totally different. Forget, not forget Torah Sinai, but leave aside Torah Sinai. Here you have a nation who's returning to its national homeland after being exiled for 2,000 years. But that was our national homeland. We're not coming in as colonialists like the British came to India. We're coming back to the land that was historic. And throughout our existence in exile, we always said we want to go back to that land. Okay? And therefore, it's a very interesting. But we have to recognize that. We have to recognize that in many ways, okay, we are really arguing for something that's absolutely unique. And what we have to be careful about is not allowing people to use incorrect language. Okay? They don't want to use the language of Torah Sinai because they don't believe in Torah Sinai and they don't believe in Revelation. We cannot let them use the language of colonialism. We are not European colonialists moving into India. We are not the occupation forces. We are a nation that's absolutely unique in the Jewish in the world, And people have to understand that we have to deal with us with a different language. Because there's no other nation that existed outside of its land for 2,000 years. It's just, a nation in exile? What kind of nation is that? And now we move toward defining nationhood by inhabitants. Well, wait a second. We were a nation outside of it, kicked out of the land, and we want to go back to our national homeland. Now, it's unfortunate other people have moved in there, and there's challenges like this and so forth and so forth. But we are not in we are not similar to any other situation. I'm pointing this out because I think it's significant that it takes us actually to see a remarkable, aspect of our own Jewishness. But the fact is I think this is a problem. Our language is not clear. We use the language of Torah Sinai. For us, it's an argument. The world says, I don't buy Torah Sinai. The only model they have for language is a colonial language. Outside the usurpers trying to take the land away from inhabitants. We have to respond, but that's not our language either. We were a national entity who were kicked out of our land, so we have a different situation. Now, they might still say, they might still try and figure out ways to get around it and so forth, but now at least we're talking a language that can be understandable. And that's what I really wanted to get at. It's very, very difficult to talk apples and oranges. Very difficult. Okay, and the point is that it's really a problem, because what you find is you're talking apples, and you find that the person who's talking apples from the other perspective is someone you really don't want to associate with, but the person who's talking oranges is someone that maybe you do want to associate with. But then they have different facts dealing to their conclusion. What we have to do is develop a way of bridging that gap. And that's why I think it's very significant for us to understand the uniqueness of the Jewish question, of what this is, what we are offering by going back to Israel. We are doing something that the world just doesn't understand. How did this nation exist outside of its land for 2,000 years with a hope of returning to land, which is what we're doing now? Someone said to me, Tassi said, do you think, one of the big problems, he was talking back to Herzl and said, Herzl should have taken Uganda, we'd have less problems. And I said to the person, no, you wouldn't. You'd have more problems. Because then you really would be a colonialist. You have no basis to that land. Outside of Torah Sinai, the fact is that we are offering, and this actually supports the uniqueness of the Jewish people. The fact is we're talking about a reality that the world does not know how to deal with. And we have to try and get the world thinking of how to deal with that. Okay, I'm going to give up the mic and see if there's any comments. Cheryl, if you still have that question, please. Sure, I thought that was your longer question before. Okay, everyone. So as I mentioned, that's basically what I wanted to say. Right. But you see the dilemma, and Cheryl, your point is exactly it. We have to recognize that when we're dealing with Torah, that when we're talking to people who don't accept our priorities, we have to understand how we're going to express ourselves to them. Okay, so that's it for tonight.